Hello and welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Today is Sunday, July 23rd. I am with my friend Ryan Boyer, and my name is Chris Crawford. Reverse the order because Ryan deserves more credit than I do. We're going to be offering some FAAB recommendations. We're going to talk about some highlights and some lowlights from Saturday's action. But before we do that, let's get into some headlines. And unfortunately, Drew, unfortunately, Ryan, Drew and I talked about this.
How dare you?
I know. You guys are all interchangeable for me. It's bad news for Corey Seager. We were concerned that he was going to be headed to the injured list, and it sounds like our concerns were warranted, my friend.
Yeah, I guess you guys touched on it a little bit yesterday.
Yeah.
When you and Ryan, you and Drew had your podcast. And Thumb, a very ill-advised, by the way, trying to make a double out of a single from Corey Seager. He got easily thrown out and hurt his thumb in the process. And they're saying that the MRI came back clean, like there's no structural damage, but I guess maybe it's swollen and sore enough that they decided to go and put him on the injured list. The good news is there's no, those injuries can very easily be like a UCL sprain, and it doesn't seem like that's the case here. So seems like they're hopeful that he'll be back in a couple weeks. Hopefully that's not something that lingers. Thumb injuries, wrist injuries, hand injuries in general can not be a great thing for a hitter, but this does seem to be on the minor side. Ezekiel Duran going to see some action at shortstop, and he's had already been playing every day, obviously, between DH and left field, but now he's going to settle in at shortstop for at least a couple weeks. Travis Jankowski has moved up to the 2 spot in the Rangers lineup. He's actually been pretty good. I was really hoping we would see either Duran or maybe Leody Taveras moved up to that 2 spot. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. So Jankowski, while he's batting second anyway, he has zero power. I think you and I both have more career home runs than Travis Jankowski, but he does have speed, and he makes enough contact that he can hit for a reasonable average. So, that gives him a little boost in deeper leagues, but still not a terribly exciting option. But the biggest takeaway, I think, is that while Corey Seager's going on the IL, it seems relatively minor.
Yeah, I think that's great news in terms of terrible news. Like, if you're going to ask me to have something like that happen. By the way, it's worth pointing out both injuries for Corey Seager now have come on trying to make plays out of doubles, because that hamstring injury came while he was trying to make a hustle double as well. Corey Seager, station to station, buddy. That's what we're asking for you.
Big takeaway here is do not hustle, kids.
Don't hustle. Don't try. Homer Simpson told it to us, and Homer Simpson has never lied to us. But unfortunately, Ryan, this is not the only injury news for those Texas Rangers who are having an excellent season. But Adolis Garcia missed Saturday's game. It was removed from Saturday's game after he was hit by a pitch. I believe it was a 98-mile-per-hour fastball to his hand. He's not in the lineup today. That's one of the reasons I think that Travis Jankowski is hitting second in that lineup, or part of it anyway. The good news is X-rays have come back clean, so it doesn't sound like this is going to be a long-term thing. However, we have certainly seen cases where X-rays come back clean and players get placed on the injured list. Why, I think we just talked about one, Ryan. There is definitely something to be cognizant of. It's too bad because Adolis Garcia has had an excellent season. Whether or not you love the old RBI or not, he is leading baseball, or was tied for the lead in baseball with Matt Olson. Hasn't really provided quite as much help in the stolen base category, I think, as we were thinking he was going to, but was certainly a source of power production in a loaded Texas Rangers lineup. My guess is, and I'm not an injury expert here, you might be looking at putting a new outfielder in your lineup for a few days, just because this is It's hard to play baseball without your dominant hand, Ryan. It's very hard to play baseball without it playing a healthy thing. Maybe he can be returning to the lineup as a designated hitter, but a bit of a bummer for Garcia. I'm going to be curious to see too, if they do have to place him on the injured list, how this affects their deadline plans, because there is some depth in that lineup. There's still really good hitters in that group. But when you're without Seager and you're without Garcia in a loaded AL West, like there are 4 teams now that have a real chance of winning that division. I did not think we were going to be saying that at this point last year. And it's probably a 2-team race, but you certainly have to be at least cognizant of the Angels, who are playing really well, and the Mariners, who are starting to play well as well. I'll be curious to see if this makes them a little more aggressive at the deadline for another bat.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Adolis Garcia, he's 2 years in a row now that fantasy managers have doubted him, and he's proved to be a great value. I'm sure the same thing will probably happen again next spring. We fantasy pundits, excuse me, aren't typically keen on guys with plate discipline that bad, but
yes,
the counting stats, have obviously been there for Adolis Garcia, and he hits the ball hard enough to where he can at least hit for an acceptable average as well.
Real quick, I did want to say, one of the reasons that Garcia has been so much better this year, I think, has been because the plate discipline has been better. Like, he walked 40 times in 156 games last year. He's already up to 40 walks this year. In part, I think, because it's harder to pitch around Garcia, and you have to be a little bit more there's reasons why Garcia can actually be patient. He does not have to be the middle of the order hitter for the Texas Rangers right now with some of the other options. But I just did want to point that out, that one of the reasons why I think he's been so much better this year is there's actually reason to think that he might not swing at a pitch outside of the strike zone.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And by the way, we shouldn't be surprised, I don't think, that he is not going on the injured list. If you've seen Adolis Garcia, the ball probably has a better chance of going on from being struck by that. I mean, he's basically just a big rock. He's a large, very ripped, very well proportioned individual.
Yes, sir. Yes.
One guy that is going on the injured list, Gabriel Moreno from the Diamondbacks. Chris and I were talking about it a little bit prior to the pod. I would say a relatively disappointing season so far for Moreno. The power really hasn't been there. Hitting for a decent average, especially for a catcher.
Mm-hmm.
But to give a little plug for my lineup lowdown, which I do each week, I covered the National League this past week. By the way, every Tuesday on RotoWire.com, check that out. And I put a lot of work into that beast.
Mm-hmm.
But I had noticed since Carson Kelly came back from the injured list, I think he actually made more starts at catcher than Moreno, which, Carson Kelly's not hitting at all. I know the Diamondbacks like his defense. So that's something to keep in mind with, Moreno's fantasy outlook. But shoulder inflammation is not, I believe it's his non-throwing shoulder.
Right.
That he went on the injured list with. So hurts his counting stats. The power really hasn't been there, but something to keep in mind is Chris was quick to point out to me prior to the podcast. Moreno is still very young. Prospect progress is not linear, as we like to say.
No, that's true.
Still think there's plenty of upside there. But, I think you can probably cut him loose even in a 2-catcher league at this point. He's going to miss at least a couple weeks. Doesn't seem like a long-term injury, but with the lack of power and the lack of playing time, it's not great for the counting stats. And even if he comes back, early August, that's probably not something you need to wait around for.
No, look, I still have a lot of faith in Moreno in the long term, like Ryan was talking about. Although I will say, this is a couple years now where he just hasn't shown any power whatsoever. Now, he may have someday an 80 grade hit tool. Like, he can make hard contact, and he has really good bat to ball skills. You got to drive the ball a little bit. And I also think it's worth pointing out, like, when he comes back, because the Diamondbacks are so deep into this race, I probably am trusting Carson Kelly more, just because he's the veteran backstop, the guy who's you're going to work with this stuff. Diamondbacks are definitely in this thing. It's crazy how deep they are into this thing. I thought they were a year away. I thought the same thing for the Reds, though, and they're in this thing as well. But I do like Moreno long-term, somebody that I'll target late in drafts next year, because I imagine Carson Kelly plays for a new team, and Moreno will get every chance to be that starting backstop.
Real quickly, just to put a little bow on this. Kind of funny, I think, that Lourdes Gurriel actually has turned out to be the best player, at least for 2023, in that trade.
Yeah.
Dalton Varsho, not having a great year. He's been fine for fantasy because he's still hitting for a little power, a little speed.
Right.
Numbers as far as the rate stats go, not great. And Moreno still has a little work to do. So Lourdes Gurriel coming off an all-star campaign. I just thought that was funny because he kind of felt like almost a throw-in in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely salary ramifications for him being included in that trade. Sure. That's for sure. Yeah, that's really funny. By the way, with no catcher eligibility next year, it does Dalton Varsho's stock plummet, I think, as much as anybody next year, because the fact that he's a solid outfielder, and he's a really solid real life player if you're looking for some steals. But Ryan, we can get steals anywhere. We can get steals pretty much anywhere at this point, assuming they don't change the rules back for some reason. But yeah, I do like Moreno long term. But I want to see some more pop. I'd really like to see him actually drive the baseball. Hopefully we see that starting in 2024, because I don't think he's relevant in 2023. Someone who is going to be relevant, I think, in about a couple of weeks is Brandon Woodruff. And Brandon Woodruff was excellent in his rehab start for High A Wisconsin. It's still weird to me that that's the High A team. It was the Low A team for a long time for the Seattle Mariners. The Go Timber Rattlers, I still think that's their name. Anyway, long story short, 3 scoreless innings, struck out 4 through 27 of 32 pitches for strikes. Now, I think fantasy managers are well aware that this guy has been out since the middle of April with a grade 2 subscapular strain. You're still going to need to see him get stretched out. There's definitely 32 pitches is not the goal. You're going to have to see him go deeper. I imagine he'll probably throw 50 in the next one, 65 in the next one. But sometime early in August, or maybe the middle of it, if you want to be optimistic, maybe you can say the early portion of August, like right in the middle of the August 7th, August 8th, something along those lines. He could be back. And I think people forget that when Brandon Woodruff is healthy, he's been among the very best fantasy starters in baseball. I'd be excited to go get this guy. If he's still available in your fantasy league, I'd go roster him right now. But I imagine he's probably still on the injured list. Having said that, a good trade target, a good player to target if someone was impatient and dropped him.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we've grown accustomed to having to kind of bake in these injured list stints for Brandon Woodruff. He's just not been durable. I think it was a shoulder last year as well that he dealt with, maybe like an oblique the year before that. He missed like a couple months with kind of a severe oblique strain. But yeah, when he's healthy, he's been awesome. Brewers will certainly welcome him back into that rotation, a rotation that's actually, they've gotten a couple kind of surprising performances. Colin Ray has been actually not terrible. Julio Teheran has been not terrible.
Yeah.
They're going to be happy to welcome Brandon Woodruff back into that rotation as they try to hold off the Reds. And fantasy managers will be happy to welcome him back too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have him sitting on my IL in quite a few leagues, and it will be nice to finally activate him some point in the early portion of August. All right, so that covers most of the big week storylines. We're going to do 3 up and 3 down on Saturday and talk about those waiver targets, a bunch of guys that I really like for this week. But first, let's take a quick commercial break. So we know the weather can impact how far a ball can fly, but we never really know what all that heat and humidity or cold air is really doing to the ball. The Home Run Forecast Index gives us an easy way to determine how good or bad the air is for ball flight. The index is calculated by measuring stadium-specific weather conditions and is displayed on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the most unfavorable for good ball flight and 10 indicating the most favorable. There is a strong correlation between the index and the number of runs scored per game and the number of home runs hit. Games that have that highest index of 10 for the whole game average over 10 runs and 2.8 homers over the course of the year. An index is created for each game so you can see what it will be in any stadium and how the weather's influence might change over the course of the game, as well as the wind direction. Now, right now, you can get access to the HRF Premium site for only $5 a month and see what the index will look like for every hour of every game. Go to homerunforecast.com now to sign up. All right, let's get into those 3 up and those 3 down, Ryan. We've got some fun young hitters to talk about, but a guy that you liked when we did our show for bouncing back for the second half had a pretty nice little game on Saturday. Yeah, yesterday was Saturday for those Boston Red Sox. Talk about Tristan Casas.
Yeah, an awesome start to the second half too. He had his first career 2-homer game yesterday against the Mets. If you count the resumption of the suspended game, which they got not rained out. Friday's game got suspended due to rain, so they actually finished that Saturday first.
Right.
If you include that game as well, yesterday he reached base 6 times, had 2 home runs and a triple. Yes.
Nice.
He actually, I assume an outfielder fell down or something.
I've assumed a couple outfielders fell down.
Yeah, but if we go from the start of the second half, Tristan Casas is 10 for 22 with 5 home runs, 8 RBI, and 8 runs since the All-Star break. So really cashing in on that potential. As I mentioned in the buys for this post All-Star break, he's been hitting the ball hard, taking his walks. The plate discipline remains good. Strikeout rate's a little high, but he got a really good eye at the plate and consistently, I believe in the last week's pod, average exit velocity, max exit velo, batted ball, hard hit data, all in the 80th percentile or higher, something like that. So I felt like it was a matter of time, and just kind of anecdotally, he's just like a guy that really is like a hitting savant. Like he's mentioned this before, but he reminds me of kind of like a young Joey Votto. He's just all about baseball, all about learning about hitting, and I just really trust him to figure it out. He's going to sit against some lefties.
Yeah,
that's not ideal, especially for the counting stats, but I still really like him to eventually hit a really high ceiling. And if he's still out there in your waiver wire, which he still could be in some leagues, especially a position deep like first base, he could still potentially be out there. Absolutely pick up Tristan Casas.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in him long term. Sure wish he wasn't limited to first base. And again, the thing about the being out of the lineup against lefties, which, by the way, I think that's going to be my biggest concern for him in 2024 is, are they going to give him that shot to hit against lefties? Because he's a pretty important part of what they're building there. I would like to give him that shot to play against lefties. So I'll be curious to see if they do. I understand why he's not doing it now. He's looked awful against them. And the fact that the Red Sox are in prime position to compete for that final wild card spot. Heck, they're in prime position to compete for one of the top wild card spots at this point, especially with the Rays. Just kind of natural regression has hit them harder than I think we expected, Ryan. But yeah, there's absolutely a chance for Casas to be a really good player for a really long time. Ryan, I'm super excited that I get to talk about Big Dumper. Cal Raleigh had a monster game on Saturday. He picked up a couple of homers. It was interesting, by the way. I was thinking about changing my 3 down and including Kevin Gossman. Weird start for him. Gives up only 4 hits, all 4 hits being homers. one of those to Dylan Moore on the most guess swings that I've ever seen in my entire life, but it still left the ballpark. But Raleigh was responsible for 2 of those home runs. I think his season's been a bit of a disappointment. You take a look, he does have 14 homers, which is nice from the backstop position, but hitting just 221, a 302 on base percentage combined with the 221 average tells you that he has been willing to draw some walks, but a 421 slugging percentage, not exactly what you're signing up for a guy only hitting in the 220s. I think if you take a look at the metrics, there's reason to be excited for a strong second half. And it's also worth pointing out that Raleigh was much better in the second half last year than he was in the first half. But expected slugging percentages in the 76th percentile, barrel percentages in the 81st percentile. It's very nice to see that he's walking in the 69th percentile, and he's going to get a chance to play a lot because Tom Murphy is a terrible defensive catcher, and Cal Raleigh is not. He's an excellent framer.
Playing a surprising amount, though, against lefties,
Yes.
Tom Murphy, which hasn't been ideal for Cal.
Right. That's the biggest concern, too, is just that for the short term anyway, Tom Murphy, and over Tom Murphy's career, he has clobbered left-handed pitching. He is going to be in the lineup a lot. I think some people were hoping that, not Chris Crawford as a fan of the Seattle Mariners, but I think some people were hoping that Tom Murphy was going to be the designated hitter against left-handers, with Cal Raleigh still playing against righties or playing against southpaws behind the plate. And he probably should. He had an 820 OPS against left-handed pitching last year. It's not like he can't do it. It's just they do like Murphy. Some pitchers like working to Murphy. No, it shouldn't be the case, but I think that they really like him as a person in the clubhouse. But Cal Raleigh's obviously very popular too. I think Raleigh's going to be a really, really strong option over these next few years, but there is some flaws. Hitting for average is going to be a struggle because of how patient of a hitter he is and because he is willing to grip and rip even with 2 strikes. But yeah, I like Big Dumper.
Yeah, and he's not gonna beat out too many infield hits with that. Either. No. Yeah, I think we were both hoping he was a target of mine as well coming in. Season. I think we were both hoping because he hits the ball so hard that that would allow him to overcome kind of some strikeout issues and obviously 0 speed to where he could, hit 250, 260 and provide that power. And the power's been a little down. But yeah, I'm totally down for him, Big Dumper having a big second half. I think he's certainly over the long haul, especially is going to be a pretty viable fantasy asset.
Sure.
One guy you mentioned last week, part of our up series now, Brady Singer.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even let me poo-poo your stinger pitch. I was prepared to do. But you wouldn't even let that happen. But I got to give Mr. Singer his props. Season high 9 strikeouts yesterday. Two runs over 6 innings pitched against the Yankees. Had 14 whiffs on those 98 pitches. A very nice 36% CSW. Over his last 5 starts, he had 1 really bad start at Cleveland. But I'm going to go ahead and ignore that for the purpose of just propping him up here.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, so if you look at those other 4 starts over his last 5, 2.33 ERA, 0.96 WHIP. So trending in the right direction. The strikeouts have not been great over that stretch. But he has shown in the past he's not going to be a huge strikeout guy anyway, but he could potentially give you like a strikeout per inning. He had, as I mentioned, season high 9 yesterday in 6 innings. Problem with Singer is he's, we've gotten used to the inconsistency from him, and gosh, the Royals are just
oh my goodness
so
gracious.
bad. Remember when the Royals thought they were gonna compete for a playoff spot like 2 years ago, and they were very, very bullish on their postseason outlook. Mike Matheny will crash those hopes and dreams in a hurry. So they had to make that managerial change. But yeah, I think Singer is probably still more of a streaming option. But yeah, I think he's at least starting to find his way back in the fantasy manager's good graces, and at the very least when he's going up against a weak offense, which the Yankees without Aaron Judge are a weak offense right now. So you can stream him in those kinds of matchups.
It is funny, though, as we're recording this right now, that the Yankees have scored 3 runs and Jordan Lyles has yet to get an out in the first inning. Maybe that's what they needed. We just had to talk about that offense while they were performing, and we fixed everything. Or it's possible that Jordan Lyles just isn't a very good pitcher. It's one of the two.
Did you see the Jordan Lyles kerfuffle, whatever you want to call it, this past week with the grip enhancers?
I didn't.
Spencer Torkelson not so subtly called him out.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to keep that up.
Yeah, there was a still shot of Lyles in the dugout. He was like adjusting his cap, and you could see plainly on his wrist he had something there.
Ooh.
And Torkelson was quick to point out. By the way, he said, "Oh, this guy's 1-11, so I guess good for him for getting away with it." But he also pointed out that his spin rates and everything, and his like vertical movement and everything were all well up for that one start against the Tigers, which he pitched well. So,
hey man,
I don't blame Jordan Lyles for trying it. I mean, he was, as Torkelson mentioned, 1-11. I believe that would have put him on pace to go like 2-20 something, 3-20. You know, so you got to do what you got to do. If you can get away with it, pitchers are still gonna find ways around it. So they're gonna. The crackdown is not going to cover everything. You can find ways to hide it, although that was still pretty apparent, as I mentioned, very noticeable on that wrist. But the umpires didn't check that particular area. So good for him.
I'm going to have to search for that. And by the way, Jordan Lyles may be 1-11, but he has a 6.29 ERA. So. There's lots of reasons.
That's a feather in his cap.
Yeah, there's a feather in his cap. Speaking of bad pitching, there were some terrible pitching performances that we're going to go over in our down section, Ryan. And unfortunately, we got to start with Logan Webb. And I'll bet a lot of people were pretty darn excited to have Logan Webb in their lineup. He's pitched really well as of late, coming off 7 innings of 2-run baseball against the Cincinnati, throws a shutout against the Rockies, pitched well against Seattle in the start before that. I think he had struck out 28 guys in his last 23 3/3 innings. Didn't get really a chance to strike out too many guys in this one, Ryan. Goes 1 1/3, and he gives up 6 runs against a not-so-good Washington lineup. Gives up a homer, a walk, and 2 strikeouts. To say this is probably just a blip on the radar is probably quite the understatement, considering how good Logan Webb has been. But I think we've seen all year, Ryan, like even the very best starters have had absolute stinkers this year. It's been really weird to see. And we're going to talk about a future Hall of Famer in just a second that had a stinker of a start. It's just been kind of crazy to see how little dominance we've seen from pitching in 2023. Like there's been some good, no question about it. But there has also been even the very best guys like Zach Gallen, I've seen have some stinkers. Luis Castillo, I've seen have a couple of stinkers. It's been weird.
Sandy Alcantara just one big stinker of season.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It was really bad early on in the season. Like there was just no stability at starting pitcher whatsoever.
Right.
Then it seemed to kind of correct itself there for a while, but now it's the offense is kind of been taking back over. But yeah, I think it's almost surely just a little bump in the road for Logan Webb. Worth pointing out, I would say he led all of baseball, I believe, in innings pitched in the first half.
Right.
And the Giants, I think, made him their 5th start out of the break just to kind of give him a little pause.
Sure.
And I'm sure that that's all it was. And his shoulder's not barking or anything, but just a little something to keep in mind there that he is on pace for a career high in innings pitched. So
real quick, Ryan, I did want to say If you're looking for somebody to replace Corey Seager, if CJ Abrams is still available, go get him. He's been excellent as of late, hitting at the top of that lineup now. I think he makes an awful lot of sense. Would be someone I would consider adding it in with FAAB dollars, even like use not a huge chunk, but if he's still available, I'd go get him. It was never a question of talent. I was just reminding of it as we were talking about how bad Logan Webb stunk. One of the reasons was CJ Abrams had a really nice game again. CJ Abrams good. The guy you're going to talk. Yeah,
he's been awesome. Up to 10 home runs now after the home run yesterday, and he's actually putting that 80 grade speed to use of late. I mean, he, for a guy that's been as fast as he is, not a huge stolen base total is even in the minors, but he's really, especially since he's moved back up to the, not back up, but moved up to the top of the Nationals order, just running wild of late, and he really seems to be coming into his own. So I'm fully on board with that CJ Abrams call.
For sure.
Another down from yesterday, Max Scherzer.
Yeah.
Like Kevin Gossman, you mentioned earlier, gave up 4 home runs yesterday, 5 runs in total over 6 innings against the Red Sox. Home runs have been an issue for Mad Max. 9 home runs so far in 24 innings pitched in July. He's up to 22 home runs allowed in 102 thirds innings for the season. I mean, we've seen Scherzer, even at his best, he can have home run issues at times. Justin Verlander has been like this too, even in years when he's been awesome. Those guys are fly ball pitchers, and they're usually solo home runs, though. I mean, they're good about if they're going to kind of groove a pitch, they're not going to do it when a runner's on base.
Right.
So Scherzer can have his issues with home runs, though. We've seen it before. But even with, this really bad gopheritis here in July, I should point out this start prior to the Red Sox, he faced the Dodgers and one hit them over 7 innings.
Right.
So I don't think we can set off alarm bells too much with Mad Max. Hasn't been there overall, though, in the performance this season. Obviously, he's had injury issues, getting up there in age. So maybe some people are pretty worried about him. I don't know. I'm still fairly bullish that he'll figure it out as long as he's healthy. But something to keep in mind, though, is he does have issues with the home run ball sometimes, and that was certainly the case yesterday in Boston.
It comes for us all, this age thing, Ryan. I will say one of the reasons why I'm a little bit bullish on Max Scherzer, the more I think about it, I think he's not playing for the New York Mets in a couple of weeks. I think that it'll be interesting to see. The comments he's made is, I'm focused on being a Met. Of course, those are the comments that Max Scherzer is going to make. But I just wonder if the Mets will, even with Uncle Stevie being like, hey, this might be a chance to sell and get some stuff, and knowing that, hey, we're going to spend $800 million on Shohei Ohtani next year. We can go ahead and deal with it, because I'm not sure the Mets are in this thing anymore, Ryan. It's really hard for me to see this team.
He just bought Trevor Gott for like $8 million or something.
$4.5 million. By the way, that's not going so well, unfortunately, for Trevor Gott. I still think that was a horrific bad look for the Seattle Mariners to be like, we can't afford to pay Chris Flexen not to play with us. We have to give you a reliever who's been effective in order to do it. Yeah. Not the very best look. Speaking of not a very good look, by the way, for most of the year, Dane Dunning, thank you so much. For most of the year, Dane Dunning has been kind of an underrated solid option for I almost said the Dodgers. He definitely doesn't play for the Dodgers. He did play the Dodgers, though, and it didn't go particularly well. 3 innings, gave up 5 runs, 2 homers, 2 walks, a strikeout. It's also worth pointing out that this is now 2 of 3 starts that haven't gone well. Those Washington Nationals, those pesky Nationals also got him as well. 5 2/3 innings of 4-run baseball. I would be at least a smidgen concerned by how Dunning has looked as of late. He hasn't struck out more than 4 batters in the month of July. He did have a 10 strikeout effort against those Detroit Tigers, who I think they're striking out. I don't even know if Detroit's playing right now, but 3 guys just struck out for that team. It is just such a terrible lineup. But the fact that Dunning doesn't miss a ton of bats, and the fact that I think we talked about Texas maybe being aggressive for a bat at the trade deadline. Texas is going to go get a starting pitcher. Texas is going to go get a reliever, a starting pitcher, and maybe a bat. I'm not 100% sure Dane Dunning has a spot locked up in that rotation if they go do that. Like, I would imagine that he would be the 5th starter if they do. But if they're aggressive, Dane Dunning may be a guy. And in fact, maybe Dane Dunning makes sense as a trade guy if you're willing to go get a legitimate top of the rotation starter to pitch with that team. Because I think Dunning's cost control and the effectiveness that he has shown would make him somebody that teams would have interest in. But yeah, this was not a good look, and I am concerned about the fact that Dane Dunning, talented, but just not missing bats at all.
Yeah, that's a good point on the trade deadline. I hadn't thought about that. He's as well as he's pitched overall on the season, he's certainly a guy that I don't think they would lose sleep over bumping him from the rotation if they could go out and get a frontline starter. But yeah, I feel like this was kind of a correction that was probably coming.
Yes.
As you mentioned with him, he just doesn't miss bats at all. Doing a pretty good job of inducing that softer contact, but doesn't have a ton of margin for error with that lack of bat missing ability, which, by the way, from what I recall, he missed a good number of bats as a prospect, but that just really hasn't carried over too much to the big league level. Began the year in the bullpen for the Rangers, quickly got moved into the rotation, as overall pitched well, but yeah, he's not a guy that I would be waiting around too long for a correction to come back in the positive way. The ceiling's just not there.
So I remember real quick, I just wanted to point to the guy with Dane Dunning because it's not important, but it is. I remember he was traded from Washington in the Adam Eaton deal. I cannot for the life of me remember who he was traded for in the Texas deal.
Lance Lynn.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's kind of a win-win trade, I would say. I think both teams could be pretty happy with how that trade has worked out. Lance Lynn was pretty darn solid and has another guy who I think, hey, maybe Lance Lynn makes sense for the Texas Rangers down the stretch. That would be kind of fun. Hey, did I just put that idea in the air? Make sure you're listening.
He would be pretty much the antithesis of Dane Dunning. The ERA is bloated, but the strikeouts are way up, which is exact opposite of what Dunning has done this season.
Did you want to talk about one other player before we get into the FAAB targets?
No, I was going to segue into
let's do it. Let's talk about them. And we've got some really good ones this week, Ryan, I think.
A lot of exciting young guys.
Yes. Start with your pitching option for those Orioles of Baltimore.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to be available in your league anymore, but certainly in shallower leagues, I think he probably could be out there in redrafts, and that's Grayson Rodriguez. Mm-hmm. Back in the majors with the Baltimore Orioles. First 2 starts back on the whole haven't been great, but he did go 5 2/3 yesterday versus the Rays. Gave up just two runs, struck out 6. Solid, I would say, in those 2 really tough matchups against the Dodgers and the Rays. And also worth pointing out that start against the Dodgers, I think when he was pulled, he had only given up 2 runs, and then both of those inherited runners came around to score. So made his line look a little worse than it actually was. Important to point out, I think he hasn't given up a home run in either of those starts. That was a major issue for him before he got sent down earlier this season, and really righted the ship at AAA Norfolk. 1.69 ERA, 0.99 WHIP, 54 strikeouts, 15 walks, and 37 1/3 innings pitched. The velocity started to come back up in the minors. That has followed him back into the majors, been consistently hitting mid to upper 90s. And I think because those first 2 starts have been just so-so, maybe someone's getting impatient and either putting him back on the waiver wire or being hesitant to pick him up.
Right.
But I still think the ceiling is just enormous for Grayson Rodriguez.
Massive.
Obviously over the long haul, and I think for 2023 as well, for an Orioles team that I believe is in first place now in the American League East, and plenty of run support he should receive, and good ballpark now to pitch in and Camden Yards with that just cavernous left field. So
Sure.
yeah, Grayson Rodriguez, if he is out there and available, absolutely scoop him up.
Couldn't agree more. Real quick, somebody asked an interesting question that's kind of related to Baltimore. Disco Dave asked, is Westberg droppable in a 12 for Arcia or JP Crawford? Ryan, what do you think?
I think he's probably droppable in a 12-teamer. Surprisingly, I think I would go with Arcia. Maybe Chris would.
No, I think that's about right.
You're not going to recommend your son picking up your son?
I love my son. If you're playing in an on-base percentage league, go get my son for sure. Because he's, like it's a 360. You do like that he's hitting at the top of the order and has a chance to score some runs sitting behind Julio and a resurgent Eugenio Suarez, who we talked about last time as well. It's been nice to see that power to start showing up. But I think Arcia is probably the more well-rounded player. A chance to get driven in by Ronald Acuna is also a very nice thing, hitting at the bottom of that order. I like Jordan Westberg.
What is a more favorable spot, the bottom of the Braves lineup or the top of the Mariners lineup? That's an interesting question.
The Atlanta lineup. Anything Atlanta lineup is the answer. That's more compliment to Atlanta than insult to Seattle, but a little bit of an insult to Seattle as well. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting one. I like Jordan Westberg long-term quite a bit. I think he's got a chance to be a really good one, maybe for a different team, because Baltimore's going to have to trade some of this infield depth. It's just stupid how many talented young guys they have who have the ability to play over the middle or at third base.
Your son has Colton Wong to drive him in.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
I saw that Colton Wong stole his first base of the season yesterday.
Wasn't that insane? I honestly, when
that can't steal first base.
No, you cannot steal first base. That is 100% true. Holy crap, Colton Wong has been bad, but had a massive hit yesterday for a game that the Mariners pretty much had to win. So thank you, Colton. We really appreciate that. Sal Frelick, and I'll be honest with you, Drew made me mad because he said he wasn't somebody he'd be interested in fantasy leagues. Ha ha! Drew Silva, look what Sal Frelick did in his major league debut. He goes 3 for 3. He drives in 2 runs. He makes a spectacular defensive play. By the way, did you see the call-up video for Sal Frelick?
I did.
How stereotypical to have a guy named Sal sitting there without his shirt on, eating, and then have a big moment to come to him. Come on, guys.
Was he eating some chicken parm?
It didn't. That's the thing. It did look like it was ribs, so it wasn't quite the thing that we would be looking for in that situation. But look, Frelick's numbers you're going to look at in AAA and say, hey, what the heck are you guys talking about? Like, the numbers are not impressive. He dealt with a thumb injury. He was due for some lack of success also in the minors, Ryan. Like, this guy has been as good as anyone since being picked in the middle of the first rounds from Boston College, who is an underrated baseball factory, by the way. They've produced some really good players. Some players who haven't worked out, a la Justin Dunn, but they produced some good stuff. I like Frelick a lot. I think he has a chance to be, if we're talking on the 20-80 scale, we're talking about 70 hit, we're talking about 70 speed, we're talking about 70 glove, which is going to keep him in the lineup. I have some concerns about the power. He doesn't really drive the baseball, so if you're playing in a league where slugging percentage can get you, maybe that's not the best alternative. But everything else I think Sal Frelick can excel at, and you saw just yesterday, sure, it's just one game. The talent is up there. There's a reason why this guy, even with as loaded in names as the Brewers are with outfielders, they were committed to this guy getting playing time in 2023 because of what he can do with the glove. And that ends up mattering in fantasy leagues, folks, because if you aren't a good defensive player, it's hard to be in the lineup, and being in the lineup is the only way you can accumulate fantasy points. I would be aggressive for Sal Frelick. I think he has a chance to be really special in the long term and a chance to be special in 2023 as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And batting cleanup today, by the way, I saw.
Crazy.
And yes, the power may be a little lacking, but being a left-handed hitter at, I'm still going to call it Miller Park.
Please do.
Is a good formula for getting the most out of that fairly limited power, and especially if he's going to hit cleanup, he can be driving in some runs as well. One guy that power is not an issue for whatsoever, Christian Encarnacion Strand.
Yeah.
Finally up with the Reds. Our long national nightmare is over. He's been promoted this week. Started 5. This does not include today's games. I assume he's probably in the lineup today, but I did not see that yet. Prior to today, I started 5 of the first 6 games for the Reds, 3 at DH, 2 at first base. He's been batting 7th. Not ideal, but that's a still pretty interesting lineup. He can have some RBI opportunities there, even in the 7th spot. 5 hits so far. He did get his first home run, and as we mentioned, just a monster at AAA this year.
Yeah.
1042 OPS, 20 home runs in 67 games at AAA Louisville. Improved plate discipline, at least by the numbers. I know it's always a little – you don't know how to quite to take it when a guy that's just mashing the ball at that level, who has never really shown plate discipline in the minors before, suddenly has a walk rate like exceeding 10% there for a while. Are the pitchers just pitching around him because he's annihilating everything, or is he actually showing some growth there? I think it's probably more the pitchers pitching around him, but not totally dismissing the possibility that he could be showing a little growth there. And I think even with the plate discipline problems, even if he doesn't draw walks and strikes out a little bit too much, he's a, what would you say, 70 grade power guy at Great American Ballpark. He's going to hit home runs. He's going to be in the lineup, I think, more days than not. So the power is going to be a boost for fantasy managers down the stretch if he is available out there in your waiver wire.
I'm so glad I don't have to put this guy's name at the top of my list like I've had to do for so long. Like him and Ellie De La Cruz were the guys that have been at the top of the list. Unless I knew
the arrival is no longer imminent. It has arrived.
He has arrived, and I don't think he's going anywhere. Like, I love it. The power is so like prestigious. Like he has a chance. It wouldn't matter what park he's playing in, he'd be a home run threat. But the fact he's playing in GAPB is just, or GAPBP is just special. Bad chili, but good park for hitting home runs. Andy Rodriguez is our final FAAB recommendation. Hasn't gotten off to a great start, but did hit his first homer. Is considered one of the best catching prospects in baseball. Put up solid, if unspectacular, numbers in the minors. Not quite as bad as Frelick's were this year, but not exactly dominant.
Better of late though in the minors.
Better as of late for sure, and that's one of the reasons why he gets to call up. Pittsburgh's kind of a fun team right now because of the young talent. It sure would be fun to be watching O'Neal Cruz, by the way, play for that team because, man, that is a team that has some really interesting young talent, and their fans deserve to watch it after years of having just one of the worst ownership groups in baseball, and still do. But they deserve good things, and they do have a really good ballpark, by the way. I personally think that's the best ballpark in baseball, in PNC Park. But Rodriguez is someone I'd be a little concerned about in the average category. Does have good speed, but he hasn't really gotten the chance to steal bases. It's interesting because he played a bunch of infield and the outfield along with being behind the plate in 2022. He's been pretty much strictly just a catcher so far in 2023. I certainly would be adding him in a 2-catcher league type of thing if you're not getting the offensive upside. But I'm not going too crazy. It's a 1% FAAB type of thing, and hoping that he lives up to the talent and maybe gives you a boost at a premium position. But I don't expect fantasy fireworks necessarily right away. Still worth a add. Worst thing that happens is you drop him for another catcher that comes up in a few weeks.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's ready to succeed as a hitter at the big league level, but as a second catcher, as you mentioned, definitely worth picking up to see what happens. Derek Shelton has already come out and said Andy Rodriguez is going to get the bulk of the catching duties, which I didn't think they were capable of starting a catcher that was not an absolute zero offensively. It is nice to see that them commit to Indy for the rest of this season. Henry Davis still hasn't caught.
Yeah,
I think he maybe caught an inning or two, but he has not started a game behind the plate yet. Which is what are your thoughts on that? By the way, is it more of an Andy Rodriguez thing, or is he just a bat and he's gonna be an outfielder and DH moving forward?
I think it's a combination of three. It's the two things you mentioned, that Andy Rodriguez is a better defensive player. Henry Davis bat can certainly play more in the outfield.
Yeah.
And also Henry Davis just isn't a very good defensive catcher. Like, he's got the arm strength and the athleticism, but some guys just don't get the position. Like, and it's not like Henry Davis is a dum-dum by any stretch of the imagination. Just go look at his comments about AFL autographers, and you know that Henry Davis is a very smart human being because of his thoughts on that. Boy, don't get me started on AFL autograph people. You are the absolute bane of my existence. But I think it's more about the fact that Andy Rodriguez fits there and Henry Davis doesn't, and he'll be fine in the outfield. I personally, if not for Brian Hayes, would be seeing what Henry Davis could do at third base, because I think his athleticism there and his arm strength would play really well. But he should be a fine outfielder, and I think there's enough power there with enough approach to the plate and the chance to steal some bases, because he is a good athlete. Both of those guys are good athletes. I think that's more the thing. But yeah, get Andy Rodriguez, spend a couple of bucks, see what happens with him. Offensively, he actually kind of reminds me of Cal Raleigh. It's a more athletic Cal Raleigh for sure, which is, darning with faint praise a little bit, but he definitely does have a similar offensive approach. Ryan,
do we have a Little Dumper nickname coming?
Yeah, I'll have to look up what we can do for that without getting fired. Ryan, before we go, did you watch Barbie or Oppenheimer this weekend?
I missed out on the what is it? Barbenheimer?
Yeah.
No, I used my one movie theater pass per year as a father of a child of two small kids this past weekend for Indiana Jones. So I did see that in the theater last weekend.
Nice.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it too. It was still the last act is nonsense, but it's not quite as nonsense as Crystal Skull, so that was nice to see.
I was admittedly distracted by the young CGI'd Harrison Ford.
Yes,
so I will say that, but
yes,
overall it was a very, very entertaining movie.
I will say though, man, you got to go to Barbie. You got to go to Barbie. I'll see Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I want to.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. It's so funny. Funniest last line I've ever seen in a movie. Drew got mad at me when I mentioned that because it's a little bit of a spoiler that you have to wait for that last line, but it's really, really good. And so is this podcast, and we thank you for listening to it. Make sure you're following us on Twitter. You can follow me at Crawford_MILB. You can follow Ryan at Ryan P. Boyer. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, rate the show. We really appreciate it. And don't forget, we have a new episode of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast every single day of the week during the 2023 season. Have a great week. It's been a pleasure. And go spend a bunch of money on Christian and Encarnacion Strand and South Relic. I can't recommend it enough.